we think that cultural differences could play a very important role in determining how people can be successful in this international management process, because of two reasons. The first one is that culture is something that is intangible, so it's somewhat difficult to really come to an answer about what it is and how to understand that. Secondly, even if we know that they are different, and people tend to understand that they are different, and probably it would be difficult for people to really come up with a nice approach to deal with these kind of difficulties. So one interesting thing is that when we learn about that culture, people in different cultures behave and live differently, usually we pay attention to the surface level of cultural knowledge, which can be considered very often like a business etiquette. So we can learn about how to exchange business cards, how to greet each other in different cultures, and people tend to be able to adjust themselves to play a role, to play nicely in this kind of business etiquette. But the problem is that very often in business interaction or business collaboration, that things by involved in this collaboration involves something much deeper than this surface level knowledge. For example, there's a chapter in our project, in our book, dealing with Korean culture. So we noticed that there's a very interesting situation happened, that there was a consulting project jointly held by American consultants as well as Korean consultants. 2 months after they started the cooperation, they encountered huge problems in terms of their collaboration, basically because of two most deeper and fundamental cultural differences that they have. The first one is that the way they treat the clients, whereas the American consultants treat the clients at an equal status, the Korean consultants treat them rather in a very respectful and higher position, so that they consider the clients as more important, also in a higher hierarchical position than the consultants. So they have to show a very strong respect to the consultants. Based on this reason, they found that when they have to finish the project in time, the Americans tend to stick to the deadline in a very strict way, whereas the Korean consultants think that if some extra demand comes from the clients, they have to comply with the demand, and it is okay, perfectly okay for them to postpone the deadline just to accommodate the particular demand from the clients. My chapter in this book deals with Confucianism and how it plays a role in determining how people conduct business and form specific organizational connections in this Chinese cultural context. Basically, I started being interested in this topic because that after having studied and also worked in Switzerland, in France, and also now in Spain, I noticed that there are huge differences between people and how managers deal with the differences in these countries. And I found it interesting to go back to the philosophical origin about why people can perceive things very differently and why people value things in very different ways. One thing we found in Confucianism is that it defined very clearly the social role and social obligations for each individual, including in a family setting, in a general social interaction, as well as in business context. So each individual has very clear responsibilities and obligations to fulfill in this kind of situation. So that kind of social rule also determines and defines how people should interact with each other, either in terms of being a leader, a manager, or in terms of the subordinates or the worker. And it also influences how people establish connection between business partners, between different companies. So we find it very interesting to see that people tend to trust people in the circle they consider as an in-group. So they tend to allocate much more resources to them and place them in important positions to fulfill the kind of administrative missions, whereas people who do not belong to this inner circle will be considered like suspicious, and they would tend to place much more protection mechanism to control the relationship between people from our group. Based on this understanding, we can also see that how business people tend to invest lots of time and energy to cultivate and develop relationship between each other internally as well as business partners, so that they can move people from the outer circle to their inner circle. So after seeing the series presented in the chapter or in the book, we can see that nowadays there are lots of things happening in terms of the collaboration between Western companies and Chinese companies. We can see lots of Western companies going to China either to establish their production sites or to enter into the market. However, we see that several cultural differences and many problems can arise from this misunderstanding or the lack of deeper knowledge about the Chinese culture. One interesting example that we see happening is that several years ago, Nike has launched a commercial film which targets to enter to attract the Chinese public. And they used lots of Chinese symbols in the film in the hope that this can attract people's attention and also appeal to them in a way that is culturally adjusted. However, the film became a failure because that they used an American basketball player entering into China and then beating all the Chinese symbols one by one, presented in a video game. And in so doing, Chinese people feel that they are very much offended, and this commercial film has been banned, and then Nike has to apologize and pay lots of money to repair the reputation the damage that it caused. So I think that this leads us to an understanding and the thinking that how important it is to pay attention to the deeper understanding of the culture, and how we should develop appropriate cultural competences in terms of specific knowledge, and also a right mentality showing respect, and certainly how to translate them into concrete behavior in interacting with people in a very concrete context. So to get things right, I think any company which would like to go international, to enter into different cultural contexts, would be necessary to focus on developing deeper cultural understanding for their high-level managers as well as for their employees in general, which this implies that they need to develop some cultural understanding based on not only reading business etiquettes, but also probably appropriate training, and also be prepared and being able to be sensitive to cultural differences. Basically, in developing deep-level cultural knowledge, what we will try to help in our training will be to relate specific cultural knowledge to one capability to make sense of the cultural events happening in front of us. That means that it's not only about describing the situation, but relate them to the cultural value, the cultural context, and come to an understanding about why people behave in that way, and what does it mean for local people as well as for people around this specific event. So with this possibility to make sense of this event, we will be able to react in a way which is appropriate, which is also acceptable by cultural insiders.